Welcome to Enchanted Lore. I recently listened to a video by Ion Hazzikostas. He is a game director for Blizzard Entertainment, and he did a presentation at Nordic Games about the 20 years of World of Warcraft. Even though the presentation was directed to game developers and game directors, I felt there were several key points that he offered that would be applicable to GMs or DMs in designing and running a campaign. We do recommend that you watch the full presentation, in which we will provide in the description below. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that even Ian is aware of WoW's long-standing RP community. Well, let's see what are some points that he presents and how we can apply them to GMs. Let's begin.
Designing that experience is transformed. Before it was released, it was your vision. It was your thing, your team's thing to craft. Once it's out there and it has become home to some number of players, it is now equally theirs. And it is their world that you need to be a caretaker of, as well as the designer of. Players will have come to the game that you made, not the one you wished you'd made. And if something's out there for a little bit, the people who are drawn to it are going to be the ones who like what that gameplay is. And the people who don't like it are going to be filtered out or repelled.
With this point, we can see that the world is your vision, but it is also the players. You should be the caretaker of the world, but let the players help build it through their questing and their RP. Another way we can look at this is that it is not just your story and your vision. If that was the case, then simply go write a book, a movie, or design a video game. But at the gaming table, you need to take into consideration the players' contributions, the actions of their characters, what impact they may have. We at Enchanted Lore are big advocates of where we believe choices matter, and that great GMs will create opportunities for choices and outcomes. You are driving the world for the character's experience, but as a part of that, you have to take cues from the players and the characters. It is not just your story that you are simply dragging the players through it, but it is supposed to be a symbiotic relationship.
I was thinking about trying to come up with a clever visual way of presenting my idea. When I started Googling around, I was delighted to discover that an artist had beaten me to it, so I'm just going to borrow what they did. Here, imagine you see a nice path laid out, a city park or whatnot. Very simple, perpendicular lines, a nice path through nature. Easy. But of course, this is what will happen, as we just saw. People want to get to the corner. Maybe they're catching a bus. Maybe they just, want to cross the street quickly. They don't want to take the long path. They're going to take this path. Now let's imagine our urban planner friend had a vision. He had something in mind when creating this, and it did not include this path. So what does he do? Put a bench down. Don't walk this way. And also, if you want to sit and enjoy the nature around you, now you have a bench. You can, rest your legs. This is better, right? No. People are still going to try to take the path. All right, no, really. Also, stop littering in the park. Throw your stuff out in here and walk on this nice straight path that we made for you. What's the problem? Of course, this is, people are people. This is going to continue as it will. Okay, for real now. Let's put this whole hedge here. And honestly, you can imagine this designer reflecting on this and saying, actually, it's a good thing that those paths happened, because where we landed is a better overall vision. It's a bit, this aesthetically nicer. It was a bit overly simple before. This is perfect. And maybe it holds up for a little bit, but no. And so here we find ourselves again. So what do you do in this situation as a designer? Well, you embrace what people are telling you and showing you very clearly they want to do. You make that a path that you support. And once you do that, things will be fine. For a while, anyway. So full credit to the artist here, Chaz Hutton. But the moral of the story here is, as a designer, as a developer, avoid falling into adversarial patterns where you are fighting your players, where you're acting at cross purposes. And also think about the emotion that that's causing in them and what you're aiming to achieve. Put yourself in the shoes of someone who's commuting every day and trying to catch a bus and comes through this park and finds that there are obstacles in their path. How do they feel about the city planners who are doing that? Probably not great. Do you want your players to feel that way about you?
I think this video points out a prime example of how players can deviate from desired paths. As a GM, you should be flexible and understand that sometimes the best laid plans need to be thrown out the window and you just need to go with the flow. A prime example of this, of where we experienced where I had presented to the players an opportunity where they came across an enemy dwarf and he was alone in the woods and dying from his injuries. I had thought that the players would have the opportunity to simply do a mercy kill, or that perhaps they would, move on or loot him or something of the sort. What I did not expect was that they would actually put in effort to use their precious resources to save the dwarf and have the dwarf continue on the adventure to get to a safe location before they parted ways. So this was an example of something that, hey, I thought they would go in a certain direction and I had to adjust. And there's other similar stories. Another aspect that we could kind of think about with desired paths and players is that GMs and players should have alignment and not fight each other. Because as a GM, you should understand the goals and the play styles of the players, but likewise, players should have an understanding of how the campaign is structured, so that way they can determine if they are a proper fit. As an example we've used before is if a person is expecting a game to be nothing but memes and maybe high fantasy and stuff, it is not going to be compatible with a GM who is trying to play and run a game where it's more down to earth and realistic and with a lower level of magic.
Utility or playstyle options. And you'll have everything that you used to, but the UI is much more elegant, it's much more maintainable. And as we look ahead, we can add one new row every expansion as needed, and we can keep doing that for a long time. This felt like a strictly superior system, viewed through that design lens. Players were getting everything they previously had, and it was going to be extensible in a way that the old system wasn't. In fact, the systems designers who built the original 2004 talent system, when they saw this, they were working on other projects at Blizzard at the time, they sent over huge praise. They're like, this is amazing. We wish we'd done this 8 years ago. Great job. And then it turned out players kind of hated it. Why? Because what we had done was optimized for the long run. But what had happened was that leveling no longer felt rewarding. It no longer felt meaningful. You leveled up, and you didn't get a talent point to spend. In some cases, you basically got nothing. Maybe you got one thing every 10 levels. That was not adequate. And it was a resounding point of feedback. People either said they specifically didn't like the talent system, or they just, leveling felt dull and they couldn't put their finger on why. And so what we had done was, again, optimize for something at the expense of players' experience today.
A key point that we can take from this section is that we should make leveling feel meaningful. And lucky for us is that most D20 systems already have this built in to where you feel that sense of progression. You feel the improvement with the abilities and the powers that you gain. One of the challenges that GMs should take into consideration is looking at the milestone method. for when characters should level up. I am a big proponent of using the milestone method, as I feel it brings a lot of convenience to GMs for when the characters should be able to advance. However, with one of the challenges you might see with this method is that if you are very RP heavy, or that if you are slow progressing, then you might go multiple sessions where players are not seeing any meaningful advancements. Now, we're not saying that you should go and level them up, but that you should look into incorporating alternative methods and rewards, especially if you are going through multiple sessions. Examples of what I'm talking about is maybe going and giving additional skill points. So if you saw they've been focusing a lot on a particular thing, maybe doing like knowledge history, doing research, I'll give them a bonus point for that, or whatever is appropriate for the RP scenario. Maybe you give them a temporary buff. They get a follower, or they get these other sort of reps and titles and stuff. This is also a prime example of why we should look at building and incorporating short-term goals that the characters and the players can fulfill while working on long-term goals.
Steward of this live game, you have to move very carefully and cautiously in these situations. Again, it's not to say never do them. It's not to say never remove restrictions, never be super generous with some of your offerings. But understand that there are some things that you just can't take back. So one example of something that we're applying this to right now is the rules governing playing with opposite faction players in World of Warcraft. So World of Warcraft has had Alliance and Horde as these two opposing factions since the very, very beginning. And in the beginning, they were just the enemy, period. You could never do anything with them. You could never talk to them. If you were on a PvP server, they were just kill on sight, the end. But over time, we got more and more feedback from our players that were in large online communities that had tons of real-life friends. Hey, I'm talking to these people all the time on Discord, on whatever. Why can't I just invite my friend to my raid to play with me just because they happen to pick a different faction 10 years ago? Would that really hurt anything? And looking at this, we asked ourselves, would it? And maybe is the answer. There's 20 years of systems and assumptions and social dynamics built upon this system. And we can't totally predict what changing it will do. And we also know this is very much a one-way ratchet. There's no world where we could tell players, okay, you can now play with all of your friends of the opposite faction, and then suddenly decide a few months later, whoops, never mind, that was a mistake, we're going to undo it. That friend you played with yesterday, we have to tell them that you can't anymore. And so what do? We move slowly and gradually in this direction. We first allowed specifically real-life friends who knew each other to play together in dungeons or raids. So if you had someone that you had an existing connection with, you could invite them to your group. That went okay. We then moved one step further and allowed those people to join cross-faction guilds.
We felt that he presented an interesting point with regards to removing restrictions. So, because as we know that sometimes once you add something or remove some obstacle, it is challenging to put it back. Now, from my experience, I have seen that this seems to be less applicable with TTRPGs, so gaming sessions like typical D&D, Pathfinder, what have you, because you're dealing with a smaller group, and usually when you have to do changes of the sorts there, it is much easier to communicate and have buy-in from the group, especially if you have to deal with something that maybe you allowed that is just overpowered and just breaking things, and you can then communicate and say, hey, can we rein this in a bit, or this is not working as designed, right? So this is, I feel, easier to do in a much smaller setting. Where I find this to be more applicable is with regards to the various RP guilds and RP communities. For example, there's one that I participated in, and I had the opportunity to help work with others in redesigning certain skills that their players would utilize in RP scenarios. So the problem with that was that you had to be careful, because if you took away certain abilities and functions that people had relied upon, or maybe certain spells, then you would see where then people would get kind of upset and stuff. And justifiably so, because if that was how they had designed their character, taking that away is going to leave for some negative emotions. Another aspect and challenge that I saw, and this one where a lot of people kind of got angry, was where they decide to revamp the system for how the character can progress and earn certain titles, and that if you were not being active, you could lose certain progressions, and then certain things at the higher levels were just so much more difficult to achieve, requiring your character to participate in, just certain time-consuming things. As you see, certain older members, especially those that were close to achieving these certain goals and stuff, or that had already acquired these certain titles and stuff, kind of left for some very negative feelings, emotions when they were trying to redesign and trying to revamp this whole system and say, yes, this title that your character earned is no longer applicable unless you do these certain things, and then you might lose it. So anyway, I think Ian has brought up some very important points, and that we as GMs should be mindful of these things.
Avoiding falling into adversarial design patterns with your players, staying very agile, recognizing that humans, these are chaotic systems, and you're not going to find a static, perfect solution, but as long as you're moving quickly and you're responding to what you're seeing and hearing, you're going to be closer to what is best at a given moment in time. Nurture and maintain and safeguard and do everything you can do to build trust with your community and to reciprocate it. And as you make decisions, think about the future, but make sure that what you're building is fun today and is serving your players today. So, thank you.
We really liked his closing statement and felt that at the end of the day, we're all here to gather together and to have fun. And that as GMs, we just need to be mindful of our players and, just make sure that we all have fun. So that's it for today. And thank you for watching. And remember,